everyone. Welcome to today's webinar session on exploring business strategies and expanding to India. Our presenters for today are Mr. Amit Kothari, Debt Advisory and Business Development Director, and Mr. Bhavesh Gandhi, FEMA Advisory Director of Incorp Global India. This presentation will be followed by a Q&A session, so kindly keep your questions coming in the question tab. In case you face audio difficulties during the webinar, navigate to Dashboard, Audio tab, select Computer Audio. If already selected, please switch to No Audio and deselect Computer Audio again. This will fix the issue. Also, you can use the same link you received upon registering throughout the entire webinar series. I now like to welcome our first speaker, Mr. Amit, to begin. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Zara, for the introduction. Namaste and a very warm welcome from India to everyone. We are expecting a cyclone to hit Mumbai, where we are based at. So we are expecting some internet outages, and therefore to conserve bandwidth, we may have to keep our videos off during the presentation. And in case if we go off between, we shall reschedule the call at a later date. Fine. With that, we'll start. I'll start with my presentation. I'll put on my video off. So we at INCORP begin our first country-specific webinar today, and we will cover India. The presentation is divided into two parts. The first part of the webinar will be presented by me, and I will give you a brief overview of the country, its strengths, the opportunities it offers, the current scenario, and what are the government measures in the current pandemic conditions. The second part of the webinar will be taken by my colleague, Mr. Bhavesh, who will get into the technical details of setting up business in India and all the compliance requirements. So without taking too much time, let me start my presentation. We believe that India is a land of opportunities. Historically, India has offered huge business opportunities and will continue to offer the same even after the current challenging times. Let's delve deeper into understanding India. India is the seventh largest country in the world, having a land area of 3.29 million square kilometers. The country has a very long coastline of 7,500 kilometers. And along this coastline, we have a total of 200 ports, which handle almost 90% of the trade by volumes and approx 70% by value. These ports play a vital role in sustaining growth of India's trade and commerce. India is the largest democracy in the world because of its huge population. Administratively, it has a quasi-federal structure, and the country is divided into 28 states and 8 union territories. Like all South Asian regions, which are predominantly rural, India is also no exception to this. However, India, with its population and economic growth, has fostered an urbanization in the country in the last few decades. Currently, India has 436 large cities and roughly 2,500 towns, where one-third of its population resides. It is expected that 40% of the population in India will reside in urban areas by 2030. Rising urbanization throws up immense opportunities in various business sectors like housing, transport, infrastructure, power, etc. India has very strong demographics. It is the second most populous country in the world after China. Out of this huge population, nearly 67% is in the working age group. With a literacy rate of 69%, skilled and English-speaking labor easily available at an affordable cost, This has been the single biggest advantage that India offers for many businesses. Many foreign companies come to India or outsource several functions into India to leverage upon this demographic advantage. Now, quickly, let's go through the financial ecosystem prevailing in India. India is the fifth largest economy in the world, having a GDP of $2.94 trillion. It overtook UK and France in 2019. The economy functions with a strong regulatory framework in place. The regulators, RBI, which governs the financial markets, SEBI, which governs the capital and the commodity markets, and IRDA, which governs the insurance market, ensures robust governance and are the strong pillars on which the Indian economy thrives. Also, our judiciary system is very strong, proactive, and transparent. India has a world-class banking system comprising of nationalized, private, cooperative, and foreign banks. The total debt advanced by the banks to various businesses today stand at approximately $1.33 trillion. India's strong capital market is represented by its two stock exchanges, that's the National Stock Exchange and the Bombay Stock Exchange. The total market capitalization on both the exchanges exceed $2.05 trillion. Companies with robust businesses can raise equity funds from various platforms of the exchange. India's commodity markets are relatively young. There are two leading exchanges, MCX, which concentrates on gold and metals, and NCDX, which concentrates on agri-commodities. They have an average daily turnover of $0.36 billion. So, to conclude, India's financial, capital, and commodity markets have strong fundamentals, which is a prerequisite for overall economic growth. Now, let's go a bit granular and see the key industrial and commercial sectors in India. From the slide, you can quickly see some statistical data on key industrial and services sector. Service sector is the top contributor to the GDP of India, followed by industry in the second spot and agriculture in the third spot. Across the states in India, there are strong industrial corridors with complete infrastructure which are made available for industries to set up their manufacturing plants. This has helped India set up huge capacities for manufacturing steel, cement, coal, and automobiles. The capacities are mentioned on these slides, and they should give you a fair idea of the size of that specific sector. The low cost of skilled labor helps to have an extremely competitive edge in the services sector as well, and offers some amazing business opportunities. We have strong capabilities in various service sectors like BFSI, that's banking, financial services, and insurance, IT and BPO, education, telecom, and healthcare. Some cities like Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad have dedicated hubs with the entire ecosystem earmarked for the service sector. Our agricultural sector is also well developed. We are the largest producer of sugar, cotton, spices, and milk. We are a leading exporter of various food products to all the parts of the world. Given India's democratic governance, along with the established capacities and growing market size in industries, service, and agriculture, India offers immense opportunities for growth, expansion, and diversification. The major benefits of establishing either a manufacturing unit or a service unit in India is that it offers high quality and low cost of operations, including labor. India is the leading service provider in the world to BFSI. We are very strong in IT, ITES, and BPO services. with some world-class companies coming to India and setting up their units or outsourcing their business functions like accounting, research, data analytics, HR, marketing, and customer support. Other service sectors thriving in India includes fintech, e-commerce, digital startups, and clinical research and trials. Similarly, in the manufacturing sector also, we have some amazing capabilities in textiles, electronics, hardware, pharma and chemicals, food processing, handicrafts, to name a few. With several multinational companies looking to diversify their supply chains away from China due to trade protectionist measures and rising risks because of coronavirus, India could be the most preferred alternative in Asia. Government has come out with two flagship programs for encouraging entrepreneurship. The Make in India initiative for the manufacturing sector and the Startup India initiative for the manufacturing and service sector. Let's see both of these initiatives. Make in India is a flagship program of the Indian government covering 25 sectors of Indian economy like pharma, biotech, chemicals, food processing, mining, oil and gas, shipping, railways, thermal power, renewables, to name a few. The program aims to build a world-class manufacturing infrastructure and utilizing the existing Indian talent base, creating additional employment opportunities and empowering the manufacturing sector. The program is designated to facilitate investment, foster innovation, enhance the skill development, and protect the intellectual property. Also, one of the main objectives is to attract investments from across the globe. Startup India is another initiative of the Government of India intended to catalyze the startup culture and build a strong and inclusive ecosystem for innovation and entrepreneurship in India. The program objective is to support entrepreneurs build a robust startup ecosystem and transform India into a country of job creators instead of job seekers. Several benefits and tax exemptions are available to an eligible startup. Eligible startup has to obtain a certificate from an interministerial board specially set up for this purpose. So, what qualifies as an eligible startup? A relatively new business entity which is not more than 10 years old in the form of a private company or a partnership firm or a limited liability partnership firm. It has to essentially work towards innovation, development, deployment, or commercialization of new products, processes, or services driven by technology or intellectual property or IP with a scale, or it could be with a scalable business model with a potential to generate employment or creation of wealth. The turnover of the entity for any financial year should not cross INR 1 billion. Now let's look at the program benefits under Startup India. The program benefits can be divided into three buckets: simplification and handholding, funding support and incentives, industry academia partnership and incubation. Let's look at them one by one. First, simplification of laws. In order to make compliance for startups friendly, flexible, and cost effective, regulatory regime was simplified through a self-certification under labor laws and environmental laws. Second relates to intellectual properties to promote awareness and adoption of IPRs by startups and to facilitate them in protecting and commercializing these IPRs. They are provided fast track examination of patent applications coupled with the rebate in fees. There is an 80% rebate in filing of a patent and 80% rebate in fees of filing of a trademark available to an eligible startup. Third relates to handholding. To create a single point of contact for the entire startup ecosystem, to enable knowledge exchange, to serve as a platform for interacting with government and regulatory institutions for all business needs and information, government has launched a Startup India portal and a mobile application. The portal has nearly 300,000 entrepreneurs, 80 investors, 118 accelerators, 45 government bodies, 558 mentors, 450 plus incubators, and approximately 78,000 startups registered. Fourth relates to tax exemptions, which are very important. To promote the growth of startups and address the working capital requirements, the profits of the startup initiatives are exempted from income tax for a period of 3 consecutive years out of 10 years since inception. Capital gains on selling investments are tax exempted to investors, given specially to incentivize them to invest in the startups. The exemption is subject to certain conditions to be fulfilled. Fifth relates to easy exit. Given the innovative nature of the startups, a significant percentage will fail. And in the event of a business failure, it is critical to reallocate capital and resources to more productive avenues. And accordingly, a swift and a simple process has been proposed for startups to wind up their operations. Necessary provisions under the insolvency and the bankruptcy law has been made to ensure an exit within 90 days time for startups. Lastly relates to financial support. One of the key challenges faced by startups in India has been access to capital due to lack of collaterals or existing cash flows. In order to provide funding support to startups, government has set up a fund of a total corpus of INR 100 billion. The fund will be in the nature of fund of funds, which means that it will not invest directly but shall participate in capital of registered venture fund. Currently, till date, only 34.76 billion, approximately 35 billion rupees, has been invested in 323 startups. Now we move on to the impact of COVID. India has been no exception to the COVID crisis. We started witnessing the virus by Feb end, and the government very swiftly declared a complete lockdown of the country. As of As of now, about 15 to 20 major cities are still under lockdown, and the other parts of the countries have several relaxations. The business that will suffer to a great extent will be travel, hospitality, gems and jewelry, luxury goods, to name a few. The crisis that brought about a new way of living and operating businesses will surely do well, and this will include digital media, online education, consumer staples, pharma, healthcare, telecom, etc. Now, I shall cover the government package announced to jumpstart the economy post the lockdown. The package focuses on survival and growth of all enterprises, restoring production and gainful employment, and strengthening the capacities of financial institutions. The package aims to provide 20 trillion rupees stimulus, which accounts for nearly 10% of India's GDP. The package has significant allocations for the MSME sector since they are more vulnerable. Measures include debt support to cash-strapped MSMEs to the tune of INR 3 trillion. Additional financial support to various industries where MSMEs are actively involved, like food processing, dairy, animal husbandry, spices, cultivating herbal plants, fishing, shrimp farming, to name a few, were also announced. Other measures to boost liquidity in the economy were announced, which included significant reduction of the interest rates, loan moratorium for 6 months, special debt lines for COVID, and special lines given by RBI to commercial banks and financial institutions. Measures are also taken by government to incentivize the banks to do more lending so that no businesses suffer. To boost the trade and exports, government announced that they will conduct virtual trade fairs and exhibitions in the COVID period. Similarly, government has mandated all its undertakings to clear their dues within 45 days to enhance further liquidity. So lots of announcements are made by the government, and they have said that if required, they will come up with additional measures. IMF projects India's growth rate at 1.9% in 2020 and have placed India as the fastest growing economy post considering the impact of COVID-19. So I believe you must have got a fair idea about India as a country, the opportunities available, and its current situation. So let's see the regulations that may impact your market entry. So first and foremost is while you're setting up the business in India, we need to check up what is the FEMA requirements. Okay, so under the FEMA law, which relates to Foreign Exchange Management Act, there are certain businesses where there are sectoral caps. So in certain sectors, 100% foreign ownership is permitted. In certain sectors, 76% foreign ownership is permitted, and so on and so forth. So FEMA regulates all the inbound investment transactions. So any transaction or any business that has to be set up in India, it has to be an FDI compliant business. And for that, we have to be very sure about what are the sectoral caps. Also, there are certain other pricing guidelines, etc., which are available. So we need to ensure that those are also followed. So the major transactions which require compliance is the FDI, which is a foreign direct investment into India, issue of equity shares, doing a borrowing, an external commercial borrowing from a foreign party, etc. These are the transactions which require compliance. These are allowed, these are permitted within the sectoral caps, but it requires certain compliance. So quickly, if I see the major sectoral caps which are available, so if it's an e-commerce marketplace model, FDI is permissible under the automatic route, but it has to be a marketplace model. It cannot be an inventory model because under an inventory model, FDI is not permissible in India. If it's a pharmaceutical, a greenfield pharmaceutical investment which is proposed, FDI is permissible under the automatic route. If it is a brownfield pharmaceutical expansion, then up to 74% it is under the automatic route. Beyond 74%, it is still available, but you have to take an approval from RBI. A multi-brand product retail or trading in any sector, a 51% sectoral cap is available, means up to 50% foreign equity investment is permissible. But for that, we have to take an approval from the regulator, which is the Reserve Bank of India. But for a single brand product retail in trading sector, 100% foreign ownership is allowed, and you need not, we can up to 49%, it is under the automatic route, and beyond 49%, it is under the approval route. Real estate business by foreign entities setting up their businesses in India is not permitted. But however, construction of a development project or contractors, etc., for them under the automatic route, 100% FDI is allowed. So 100% foreign ownership is allowed. Similarly, in all the textile, education, IT, electronic system, etc., 100% foreign ownership is permitted under the automatic route. No permission is required. So the point here is for most of these sectors, we have permissions already available under the automatic route. For a small portion, we have sectoral caps, which are also under automatic route. Beyond that cap, we may have to go for specific approval from RBI. Now, let's quickly take you through the route to market. So let me run through your key business aspects in India. So how much time is required to start a business in India? Approximately 25 to 30 days, depending upon the constitution of the business. And India has an overall ranking in the world of 25, which is in terms of prospects of doing business. In terms of ease of doing business, our rank is 63. The tax regime is extremely competitive. For the new manufacturing companies, the tax rate is only 15%. And for non-manufacturing companies, the tax rate is 22% without any tax benefits. But if you want to avail some tax benefits, then the tax rate is 25%. For foreign companies, means if a foreign entity is not setting up a business in India, but is operating a branch or something like that, then the tax rate is as high as 40%. So it makes sense for foreign entities to set up an entity in India to avail the lower tax rates. GST for most of the service categories is 18%, and even for manufacturing, it is 18%. But there are some other slabs available, which is for 0%, 5%, 12%, 18%, and 28%. It depends on the product categories, but majority of them are under the 18% bracket. India has a capital gain tax regime, unlike Singapore. There is a long-term capital gain of 10%, a short-term capital gain for 15% for listed instruments. For non-listed enterprises, the rates are different. And for other capital assets, the long-term rate is 20%. Dividend distribution tax has recently been abolished in the hands of the company and has been taxable in the hands of the shareholders at their respective rate of tax prescribed under income tax. This is a very recent development. There is a withholding tax on dividend in case of a foreign shareholder, which is at the rate of 20%. The FDI confidence index stands at 16 for India. And yes, there are certain restrictions on banking and foreign exchange, but depends on the case specifics. There's only a compliance to be done. It's not prohibited. There are some compliances that has to be done. With this, I would like to try one more time if Mr. Bhavesh can join us and take us through the rest of the presentation. Over to you, Mr. Bhavesh.
Okay, thank you, Amit. There was some technical issue in the audio and suddenly it went off for some reason. Nonetheless, it has been set right. I'll just continue from where Amit left. Let us look, after looking at the basic company setup procedure, direct basic tax regime, indirect tax regime, what was the dividend distribution tax, let us now look at how does one access Indian market. There are a couple of ways one can set up an entity. There's a small sole proprietorship or partnership entity, mainly relevant for small businesses. This is widely used by locals. So this only relevant for small businesses. One can set up a sole proprietorship or a partnership activity. Limited liability company limited liability partnership is a very active vehicle to set up. It offers limited liability for promoters or investors. So the promoter's personal asset cannot be attached in case of liquidation or loss to the entity. At the same time, it offers very minimum government interference in terms of regulations, filings, and so on. So it offers a very convenient vehicle to conduct business. There is one person company, which is again not so active vehicle, only relevant for small businesses. The other vehicle which is widely used is private limited company. Here, this is the one where most non-residents prefer to set up a private limited company in India for their businesses. It obviously offers it acts as a separate legal entity. It offers limited liability protection to the members. It has perpetual succession. Foreign ownership is permitted in private limited company. There are some regulatory compliance requirements which company needs to undertake in private limited company. It obviously pays its corporate tax, and transfer of shares of a private limited company is very simple and convenient once you identify the buyer or the seller. So this is the most preferred vehicle to set up in India, and we'll be revolving our discussion in for subsequent slides more particularly for this type of entity. Then one can set up public limited company, which is meant for larger businesses where companies opt to go for IPO later at later point of time. For such entity, public limited company can also be incorporated. Let's look at how does one establish a presence in India. What are the corporate law requirements for incorporation? Every company that is incorporated needs to have, for a private limited company, needs to have minimum of 2 shareholders. Public limited company has to start with minimum of 7 shareholders. Private limited company maximum shareholders can be 200. For public limited company, there is no upper limit. For a private company, there has to be minimum of 2 directors. Public company, there needs to have minimum of 3 directors. However, of the 2 or 3 directors, as the case may be, there has to be 1 local resident director. This is an important requirement because every company needs to have 1 local director, apart from any other non-resident director for multinational companies if they may choose to appoint, but 1 local director is mandatory. Further, India does not permit corporate directorship, so only individuals can be taken on board of the company. Companies cannot become director, where some countries do permit corporate directorship, India does not. Company obviously needs to have a local registered office address. There is a requirement to appoint a full-time company secretary if paid up capital exceeds 100 million rupees. And to start a company, one can start with a very small amount. There is no minimum threshold, so it can be started with a very small portion of capital. We at Incorp India can offer a registered director service and local registered office service for all our multinational clients who wants to set up a business or have a footprint or presence in India. This is a basic process to set up a company. One has to obtain a digital signature certificate. In India, most regulatory filings have become online now. So for all the online filing, one is to obtain a digital signature certificate, which is a certificate for online uploading of any documents. For any person to be appointed as director, they need to have a director identification number. This is a unique number allotted by corporate law ministry to each individual, through which they can come on board as a director. For incorporation, there are usual memorandum of associations, articles of associations, which gets uploaded on the ministry's website. ROC, having looked at the document, confirms the documents and provides the company with certificate of incorporation. This is where the company is born, and having incorporated, company then undertakes usual registration with income tax department, where income tax department allots permanent account number. A GST registration is a separate registration, and GST department provides a separate registration number. And then there are some local state level registrations like Shop and Establishment Act or a Profession Tax Act, which varies from state to state. In parallel, company will also open a bank account, and once the bank account is set up, initial capital can be brought in by the promoters of the company. And yes, that's it. The company is all set up, and we are ready to conduct business. We at Incorp can provide all this assistance till the time company is ready to commence the business activity. We can provide entire assistance for this registrations and incorporation requirements. Let us look at the taxation regime. What is the standard tax, the usual tax requirement? India follows April to March as financial year. So every company and every assessee is required to follow April to March for corporate tax purposes, as well as the requirement is the same under company law as well as income tax purposes. India, for all filing purposes, the balance sheet and financial statements needs to be prepared under Indian GAAP. IGAAP is notified under company law, so every company has to mandatorily follow IGAAP and prepare the financial statements based on Indian GAAP. India, there's a mandatory audit requirement for every incorporated entity. So every company, irrespective of its size, capital, or bank borrowing, needs to conduct a statutory audit through an external chartered accountant. I'm aware of few countries which do not mandate statutory audit until a particular threshold of turnover or capitalization requirement has been met with. But India has no such exemption. Every company needs to appoint a statutory auditor and is required to conduct annual statutory audit irrespective of its size. Once the audit is completed, audited financial statements have to be adopted and approved at the annual general meeting by shareholders. And once shareholders approve the same, they need to be filed with registrar of companies every year. On taxation side, there is a minimum threshold of 50 million rupees. If the annual turnover of entity exceeds 50 million threshold, then there is a separate tax audit requirement which needs to be followed by every entity. However, the caveat over here is that the annual cash transaction here, meaning the physical cash transaction of the company cannot exceed 5% of the total turnover. So as long as cash transactions are below 5% and annual turnover threshold is up to 50 million, there is no tax audit requirement. Beyond this, this requirement takes in. For professional entity, the threshold limit is 5 million rupees, beyond which if there's a gross receipt exceeding 5 million, there is a tax audit requirement. And again, tax audit is required to be conducted by external chartered accountant, where he issues a separate report, and that report is filed with tax authorities every year. So here are the basic compliances under a corporate ministry as well as income tax department. As discussed, accounts have to be adopted in annual general meeting. They would be filed with registrar of companies every year within 30 days. After filing annual accounts, there is a separate annual return which is required to be filed with Ministry of Corporate Affairs every year. These are all annual compliances. Company needs to conduct 4 board meetings in a year, and gap between between 2 board meetings cannot be more than 120 days. So minimum 4 meetings are required, and each director has to make sure that they attend at least 1 meeting during the year. Apart from this, there are statutory registers and books of accounts that have to be maintained at registered office address of the company. On income tax front, there is a requirement to file annual corporate tax return, pay due taxes, and file and declare your income by filing tax return every year. There is a personal tax filing requirement where individuals are required to file personal taxes by 31st of July. Under income tax law, there are several payments which attracts withholding tax. So any payment where withholding applicability triggers, there is a separate withholding tax returns that needs to be filed on a quarterly basis. India has wide coverage of treaty network with trade partners. So for every foreign remittance, one can look at the treaty advantage. If the treaty provisions are more beneficial to a particular transaction, assessee can take advantage of treaty provision and can reduce the tax liability in India. After payment of due taxes, all foreign companies can take or seek to repatriate their profits or dividends, royalties, as the case may be, out of the country. There are some processes and forms to be filed, but after payment of due taxes, remittance can be freely made. India has very matured transfer pricing regulations where any transaction between 2 associated enterprises, by associated enterprises would mean that any transaction between related entities would attract transfer pricing regulations, and every transaction needs to be benchmarked at arm's length price. There is a separate transfer pricing report that gets filed every year along with the tax audit report and the annual income tax filing, and one needs to justify the pricing this obviously is made to ensure that there is no profit shifting from high tax jurisdiction to low tax jurisdiction, and this is obviously to take care of the tax base erosion on taxation. Apart from this, there is also a very robust indirect tax regime in GST, goods and services tax. Amit earlier spoke about what are the rates applicable on goods and services. However, there are also separate filing requirements for goods and services. There is a monthly return filing requirement if entities turnover exceeds 15 million Indian rupees. There is a separate GST audit requirement if annual turnover exceeds 50 million rupees, and there is an annual return filing requirement if entities turnover exceeds 20 million rupees. So there are separate thresholds provided under GST regime as well for monthly filing, annual filing, and audit requirement. And one needs to ensure that wherever the turnover threshold is breached, those filing requirements are complied with. As you would have seen, there are separate audit requirements under company law, under income tax law, and GST law as well, where again there are separate thresholds prescribed under each law. And apart from annual filing, if the audit is required to be done, entities also required to undertake audit and file audit report with separate regulators, may it be income tax, GST, or company law. So all these audit and tax filing requirements exist in parallel, and they all need to be complied with respective regulators as and when the turnover breaches at a particular limit. I think with this, we've covered the presentation on exchange control regulations, direct tax, indirect tax, company law formation, and so on. And Amit and myself will be happy to take on any questions that participants have on the floor. Thank you so much.
We have received a few questions from various participants. So let me take a few of them. First one says, do you need to be physically present for incorporation of an entity in India? The answer is no. You need not be physically present. You need not be physically present. It's a completely online process. But the documents which needs to be filed, you will have to send us electronically. You can send us scanned copies of the same. Physically, you need not be present. A very question very similar to this has been, do I need to be physically be present for bank account opening? So it is a bank specific requirement, but under most of the cases, you don't have to visit the bank. Banks visit you to complete their bank account opening formalities and KYC procedures, etc. So again, to be more specific, it's a bank specific requirement whether you need to be physically be present for the bank account opening or not. Mr. Bhave, there's one more query. I think you can take that. Is whether you can incorporate an entity during this lockdown currently.
Oh yes, Ministry of Corporate Affairs is quite active even in these days. So it's possible to file documents online, and we've seen online approvals being received from the ministry, and it's possible to incorporate a new fresh entity even during this period.
Okay, so basically they can do it, right? Okay, and another query raised by one of the participants was, what's the tax difference between a private limited company and a LLP? So private limited company is taxed at what rate, LLP is taxed at what rate? If you could answer that.
Yeah, so private limited company is the usual corporate structure where having a shareholder and a director in place, wherein, as I spoke about, there's a requirement to have a local director on board of the private limited company. LLP as a structure is a mix of a partnership firm as well as a private limited company. So it's a separate vehicle which can be incorporated, which provides the best of both the worlds in terms of limited liability. It offers a limited liability protection to the investors. At the same time, there is minimalistic government interference, so there are less regulations applicable to it. There's more freedom to do business, and this is also that's the reason this provides one of the effective ways of communicating and doing business in India.
Understood. There is one more query. Says India has attracted many Korean companies to India. Is there any special incentive provided by Government of India for Korean companies? And what about other foreign companies? Are there any incentives given by Government of India to the foreign companies to set up their base in India?
So from exchange control regulation perspective, one needs to look at the industry in which the investment is proposed to be made. Having determined the industry and having confirmed that the investment is permissible under automatic route or the sectoral cap is met with, one can look at taking advantage of, let's say, if it's a manufacturing outfit, one can look at taking advantage of a concessional tax rate of 15% as prescribed by Government of India. So those are the tax advantages that can be availed, maybe a Korean company or any other company coming from other jurisdictions as well. But as such, there is no specific requirement or the benefit for Korean companies because these are available across the board for any company coming from any other jurisdiction as well.
So there is no type of government grant or incentive given to any countries, whether Korean or any other country for that matter.
Right. This applies across the board, irrespective of jurisdiction.
Okay, there's one more. It says with regards to transfer pricing regulation, what does it mean by associated enterprise? By control or by shareholding?
So there's a wide definition of associate enterprise. One can become associate enterprise by way of shareholding, wherein the other company controls and composition of shareholder. That's obviously a direct holding. There can also be two companies can also become associate enterprise if they have the control parameters. So if, let's say, one company has the ability to determine and provide the composition of board of directors of Indian entity, despite there not being any shareholding, they can still be considered as associate enterprise. And if that's the arrangement between two entities, transfer pricing provisions would still be applicable to both the entities.
Got it. There's one more query which I will answer, which says that which cities has more skilled people for precision engineering company? So India has, I mean, if you divide India as north, south, east, west, all the four sides, there are metro cities available. And over there, you can easily find skilled people for precision engineering. But if you're looking for, say, western part of the country, then Pune is one such city where skilled people for precision engineering company is easily available. Down south, near Bangalore, you have Hosur, which is again a very big engineering hub where you can easily find skilled people. Up north, near Delhi, so near Gurgaon, you can find a lot of skilled people for precision engineering company. So, I mean, skilled people per se would not be an issue wherever you want to put your manufacturing entity if it is closer to any of the metros. So I guess with this, we have answered most of the queries, and we would like to end the particular presentation for the day. Thanks for attending this, and we'll request everybody of you to join in tomorrow at the same time for our next country specific webinar. And the country that we are showcasing tomorrow is Philippines. So for Philippines, please do attend the webinar at the same time. Thank you so much. Thanks for the patient hearing. Thank you once.
Thank you so much.